Good day, everyone, and welcome again to our series on circulatory system in animals or circulatory system in mammals. This time we are looking at the function and composition of blood. The last time we looked at a series of events that cut across. We compared and contrasted the organization, the function of circulatory system, including gasovascular cavity, open and closed single and double systems of circulation. The last time we also identified and described the functions of different types of blood vessels, arteries, and that's what we are doing today. And we are going to continue today to look at the functions and the different components of blood, and then we are going to describe the process of gas, nutrient, and fluid exchange between capillaries and between tissues also. Now, straight to the point of today's lecture, function and composition of blood. Hemoglobin is responsible for distributing oxygen and to a lesser extent carbon dioxide throughout the circulatory systems of humans, vertebrates, and many invertebrates. The blood is more than the proteins, though blood is actually a term used to describe the liquid that moves through the vessels and includes plasma, the liquid portion, which contains water, proteins, salts, lipids, and glucose, and the cells, that is the red and white cells, and cell fragments called platelets. Blood plasma is actually the dominant component of blood and contains the water, proteins, electrolytes, lipids, and glucose. The cells are responsible for carrying the gases, red cells and immune response, white. The platelets are responsible for blood clotting. Interstitial fluid that surrounds cells is separate from the blood, but in hemolymph they are combined. In humans, cellular components make up approximately 45% of the blood, and the liquid plasma makes up 55%. Blood is 20% of a person's extracellular fluid and 8% of the weight of individuals. What is the role of blood in the body? Blood, like the human blood illustrated in the diagram that follows, that you are seeing now, is important for regulation of the body systems and hemostasis. Blood helps maintain hemostasis by stabilizing pH, stabilizing osmotic pressure, stabilizing temperature, and by eliminating excess heat from the body. Blood supports growth by distributing nutrients and hormones and by removing waste. Blood plays a protective role by transporting clotting factors and platelets to prevent blood loss and transporting the disease-fighting agents or white blood cells to sites of infection. Now let's talk about the red blood cells. Red blood cells are also called erythrocytes. Erythro means red. Cyte, C-Y-T-E, means cell. Erythrocyte, E-R-Y-T-H-R-O, erythro, that is red. Then cyte, C-Y-T-E, which means cell. So erythrocytes are red blood cells. They are specialized cells that circulate through the body, delivering oxygen to cells that are formed from stem cells in the bone marrow. In mammals, red blood cells are small, biconcave cells that at maturity do not contain a nucleus or mitochondria and are only 7. They are only small in size. In birds and non-avian reptiles, a nucleus is still maintained in red blood cells. The red coloring of blood comes from the ion containing protein hemoglobin. The principal job of this protein is to carry oxygen, but it also transports carbon dioxide as well. Hemoglobin is packed into red blood cells at a rate of about 250 million molecules of hemoglobin per cell. Each hemoglobin molecule binds 4 oxygen molecules so that each red blood cell carries 1 billion molecules of oxygen. There are approximately 25 trillion red blood cells in 5 liters of blood in the human body, which could carry up to 25 sextillion, that is 25 times 10 to the power 21 molecules of oxygen in the body at any time. In mammals, the lack of organelles in erythrocytes leaves more room for the hemoglobin molecules, and the lack of mitochondria also prevents use of the oxygen for metabolic respiration. Only mammals have enucleated red blood cells, and some mammals, camels for instance, even have nucleated red blood cells. The advantage of nucleated red blood cells is that these cells can undergo mitosis, and nucleated red blood cells metabolize anaerobically without oxygen, making use of a primitive metabolic pathway to produce ATP and increase the efficiency of oxygen transport. ATP is about energy. Not all organisms use hemoglobin as a method of oxygen transport. Invertebrates that utilize hemolymph rather than blood use different pigments to bind to the oxygen. These pigments use copper or iron to the oxygen. Invertebrates have a variety of other respiratory pigments, such as hemocyanin, a blue-green copper containing protein, is found in mollusks, that is snail. We mentioned this in our last class, mollusks. The Yorubas said that igbin, oneje, that means the snail does not have blood. But the snail has blood, but just that the pigment involved, it is not a red pigment in the blood. So, not all organisms use hemoglobin as a method of oxygen transport. Invertebrates that utilize hemolymph rather than blood use different pigments to bind to the oxygen. These pigments use copper or iron to the oxygen. Invertebrates have a variety of other respiratory pigments. Hemocyanin, a blue-green copper containing protein, is found in mollusks, crustaceans, and some of the arthropods. Chlorochlorine, a green-colored iron-containing pigment, is found in 4 families of polychaete tubeworms. Hamartrine, a red iron-containing protein, is found in some polychaete worms and annelids. Despite the name, hamartrine does not contain a hem group, and its oxygen carrying capacity is poor compared to hemoglobin. The small size and large surface area of red blood cells allows for rapid diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide across the plasma membrane. In the lungs, carbon dioxide is released and oxygen is taken in by the blood. In the tissues, oxygen is released from the blood and carbon dioxide is bound for transport back to the lungs. Studies have found that hemoglobin also binds nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide, that is NO, is a vasodilator that relaxes the blood vessels and capillaries and may help with gas exchange and the passage of red blood cells through narrow vessels. Nitroglycerin, a heart medication for angina and heart attacks, is converted to nitrous oxide NO to help relax the blood vessels and increase oxygen flow through the body. A characteristic of red blood cells is their glycolipid and glycoprotein coating. These are lipids and proteins that have carbohydrate molecules attached. In humans, the surface glycoproteins and glycolipids on red blood cells vary between individuals, producing the different blood types such as A, B, and O. Red blood cells have an average lifespan of 120 days, at which time they are broken down and recycled in the liver and spleen by phagocytic macrophages, a type of white blood cell. Now, let's talk about white blood cells. White blood cells, also called leukocytes, Leuko, white. Cytes, we've said that before, they are cells. So leukocytes make up approximately 1% by volume of the cells in blood. The role of white blood cells is very different from that of red blood cells. They are primarily involved in the immune response to identify and target pathogens such as invading bacteria. So the white blood cells are the security guards. So they target pathogens such as invading bacteria, viruses, and other foreign organisms. White blood cells are formed continually. Some only live for hours or days, but some live for years. The morphology of white blood cells vary or is different significantly from red blood cells. They have nuclei and do not contain hemoglobin. The different types of white blood cells are identified by their microscopic appearance after histologic staining, and each has a different specialized function. The two main groups are the granulocytes, which include the neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils, and the agranulocytes, which include the monocytes and lymphocytes. Platelets and coagulation factors. Blood must clot or heal wounds and prevent excess blood loss. Small cell fragments called platelets, those are the thrombocytes, are attached to the wound site where they adhere by extending many projections and releasing their content. These contents activate other platelets and also interact with other coagulation factors, which convert fibrinogen, a water-soluble protein present in blood serum, into fibrin, a non-water-soluble protein, causing the blood to clot. Many of the clotting factors require vitamin K to work, and vitamin K deficiency can lead to problems with blood clotting. Many platelets converge and stick together at the wound site, forming a platelet plug, also called a fibrin clot. The plug or clot lasts for a number of days and stops the loss of blood. Platelets are formed from the disintegration of larger cells called megakaryocytes. For each megakaryocyte, 2,000 to 3,000 platelets are formed, with 150,000 to 400,000 platelets present in each cubic millimeter of blood. Each platelet is disc-shaped and 2 to 4.5 meters in diameter. They contain many small vesicles, but do not contain a nucleus. What are the functions and types of blood vessels? That is what we want to look at now, the functions and the types of the different blood vessels. The blood from the heart is carried through the body by a complex network of blood vessels. Arteries take blood away from the heart. The main artery is the aorta, A-O-R-T-A. The main artery is the aorta that branches into major arteries that take blood to different limbs and organs. These major arteries include the carotid artery that takes blood to the brain, the brachial arteries that takes blood to the arms, and the thoracic artery that takes blood to the thorax and then into the hepatic, renal, and gastric arteries for the liver. The hepatic artery takes blood to the liver, renal artery takes blood to the kidney, and gastric artery takes blood to the stomach. The iliac artery takes blood to the lower limbs. The major arteries diverge into minor arteries and then smaller vessels called arterioles. Arterioles. For you to remember the spelling, you can remember it as arterioles. Arterioles. So, but the correct pronunciation is arterioles, which is spelled Arterioles. The major artery diverge into minor arteries and then smaller vessels called arterioles to reach more deeply into the muscles and organs of the body. Arteries diverge into capillaries, into capillary beds. Capillary beds contain a large number, 10 to 100, of capillaries that branch among the cells and tissues of the body. Capillaries are narrow, diameter tubes that can feed red blood cells through in single file and are the size for the exchange of nutrients, waste and oxygen with tissues at the cellular level. Fluid also crosses into the interstitial space from the capillaries. The capillaries converge again into venules, venules, that connect to minor veins that finally connect to major veins that take blood high in carbon dioxide back to the heart. Veins are blood vessels that bring blood back to the heart. The major veins drain blood from the same organs and limbs that the major arteries supply. Fluid is also brought back to the heart via the lymphatic system. The structure of the different types of blood vessels reflects their function or layers. There are 3 distinct layers or tunics, Tunics, that form the walls of blood vessels. The first tunic is a smooth inner lining of endothelial cells that are in contact with the red blood cells. The endothelial tunic is continuous with the endocardium of the heart. In capillaries, this single layer of cells is the location of diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the endothelial cells and the red blood cells, as well as the exchange site where endocytosis and exocytosis. The movement of materials at the site of capillaries is regulated by vasoconstriction, narrowing of the blood vessels, that is what vasoconstriction means, and vasodilation, which means widening of the blood vessels. This is important in the overall regulation of blood pressure. Veins and arteries both have 2 further tunics that surround the endothelium. The middle tunic is composed of smooth muscle and the outermost layer is connective tissue, collagen and elastic fibers. The elastic connective tissue stretches and supports the blood vessels, and the smooth muscle layer helps regulate blood flow by altering vascular resistance through vasoconstriction and vasodilation. The arteries have thicker smooth muscle and connective tissue than the veins to accommodate the higher pressure and speed of freshly pumped blood. The veins are thinner. They are thinner walled as the pressure and rate of flow are much lower. In addition, veins are structurally different than arteries in that veins have valves to prevent the backflow of blood. Because veins have to work against gravity to get blood back to the heart. Contraction of skeletal muscle assists with the flow of blood back to the heart. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is gas, nutrient, and fluid exchange across the blood vessels. How do gas, nutrient, and fluid flow across the blood vessels? blood is pushed through the body by the action of the pumping heart. With each movement of the heart, that's the rhythm, the rhythmic pump, blood is pushed under high pressure and velocity away from the heart. Initially, along the main artery, the aorta. In the aorta, the blood travels at 30 centimeters per second. As blood moves into the arteries, arterioles, and ultimately to the capillary beds, the rate of movement slows dramatically to about 0.026 centimeters per second, 1,000 times slower than the rate of movement in the aorta, while the diameter of each individual arteriole and capillary is far narrower than the diameter of the aorta. And according to the law of continuity, fluid should travel faster through a narrower diameter tube. The rate is actually slower due to the overall diameter of all the combined capillaries being far greater than the diameter of the individual aorta. The slow rate of travel through the capillary beds, which reach almost every cell in the body, assists with gas and nutrient exchange and also promotes the diffusion of fluid into the interstitial space. After the blood has passed through the capillary beds to the veins, and finally to the main vena cava, the rate of flow increases again, but is still much slower than the initial rate in the aorta. Blood primarily moves in the veins by the rhythmic movement of smooth muscle in the vessel wall and by the action of the skeletal muscle as the body moves. Because most veins must move blood against the pull of gravity, blood is prevented from flowing backward in the veins by one-way valves. Because skeletal muscle contraction aids in venous blood flow, it is important to get up and move frequently after long periods of sitting so that blood will not pool in the extremities. This is the reason why those people who are always lying down, it's advised that people should exercise. And you exercise at least for 30 minutes, 3 times in a week. You do an exercise that will make you to breathe fast. Some people wondering that they don't have time to exercise, but if you can do house chores, you can wash the plate, you can sweep the floor, and you can clean the house. You can wash clothes if you don't have a washing machine. All these, or you can farm. If you have a small farm around your house, you can farm it, you can hoe it. All these are part and parcel of exercise. You must be involved in some activity. Then it's also advised that people should not sit down for too long because it doesn't allow them to move. So what you do is that those who work in offices or as students, after like 40 to 1 hour lecture or so, depending, you can take a break of a few minutes, like 3 to 5 minutes or 2 to 3 minutes, and then you get back on track. This is to allow for circulation of blood. Now, when you sit in a vehicle, instead of 3 passengers at the back seat, you have 4 passengers or sometimes 5 passengers, and you can't even move your leg. Your leg becomes stiff. This is what has caused it. The skeletal movement of your skeleton aids in the movement of blood. So you should move from time to time. Blood pressure and velocity. The pressure of the blood flow in the body, the pressure of the blood flow in the body is produced by the hydrostatic pressure of the fluid, that is the blood, against the walls of the blood vessels. Fluid will move from areas of high to low hydrostatic pressures. In the arteries, the hydrostatic pressure near the heart is very high, and blood flows to the arterioles, where the rate of flow is slowed by the narrow openings of the arterioles. During systole, when new blood is entering the arteries, the artery walls stretch to accommodate the increase of pressure of the extra blood during diastole. The walls return to normal because of their elastic properties. The blood pressure of the systole phase and the diastole phase, shown below, give the two pressure readings for blood pressure. For example, 120/80 indicates a reading of 120 millimeter of mercury during the systole and 80 millimeter of mercury during diastole. Throughout the cardiac cycle, the blood continues. Cardiac has to do with the heart. The blood continues to empty into the arteries, into the arterioles, beg your pardon, at a relatively even rate. The resistance to blood flow is called peripheral resistance. Now we want to talk about exchange of nutrients, exchange of materials across the capillaries. Proteins and other solids cannot leave the capillaries. The loss of the watery plasma creates a hyperosmotic solution within the capillaries, especially near the venules. This causes about 85% of the plasma that leaves the capillaries to eventually diffuse back into the capillaries near the venous. The remaining 15% of blood plasma drains out from the interstitial fluid into nearby lymphatic vessels. The fluid in the lymph is similar in composition to the interstitial fluid. The lymph fluid passes through lymph nodes before it returns to the heart through the vena cava. Vena cava is VENA-CAVA. So it returns to the heart through the vena cava. Lymph nodes are specialized organs that filter the lymphs by percolation through a maze of connective tissue filled with white blood cells. The white blood cells remove infectious agents such as bacteria and viruses to clean the lymph before it returns to the bloodstream. After it is cleaned, the lymph returns to the heart by the action of smooth muscle, pumping skeletal muscle action, and one-way valves joining the returning blood near the junction of the venae cavae, entering the right atrium of the heart. So this is where we are going to stop on this subject. The diagrams that are applicable are projected together with the lecture so that you can take your time to go over them and to understand everything in detail. So we have come to the conclusion of talking about circulation in mammals and in animals. Next time we are going to look at another aspect, which is going to be we're going to look at the excretory. We will look at the reproduction in animals. We look at the nervous system in animals. We also look at respiratory system in animals, and we also look at the digestive system in animals. We also look at the endocrine system in animals, and we also look at the integuments. By the time we do this, we'll be done, and then we'll move to other aspects. I advise that you take your time and study these materials so that you do not forget. You have to study them over and over, and you take jottings, and so that you can be able to understand them better and to get the best from them. So you can also consult other materials both online and offline that are going to help you. There are different texts that are going to help you both online and offline. So you consult them, and I suggest and I advise that you practice the diagrams. The diagrams, as you are studying, reading the materials and listening to the lecture, you should also have handy the diagrams so that you can be able to appreciate the lecture. We're going to meet some other time. Bye for now.